Hi y'all, I'm going to show you my process for editing voiceover. It's a bit time consuming, but the results are very high quality and pretty professional. You'll also end up with a very organized set of projects for any re-editing that you may have to do later, and it makes exporting at the end really fast. To start off, I've got the project SILAS 1 through 8 open. This project contains all the dialogue SILAS has for the first 8 scenes. In fact, we only have dialogue for scenes 1, 3, 4, 6, and 8. In this tutorial, I'm going to focus on scene number 4, Shadow. To start, I'm going to save this as a new project, and I'm going to name it 04 Shadow. I'm going to make sure that Create Subdirectory, Copy All Media, and Move All Media are unselected. I'm going to work with the raw files already inside of this media folder. That way I'm not cluttering our repository with duplicate source files. In this new project, I'm going to remove all of the media clips that I'm not going to be editing. Right-click and drag to select multiple media items. Press Delete to remove the irrelevant audio clips from the project. Hold Alt and left-click the markers to delete them. Now I'll move the files over on the timeline. Let's take a look at SILAS's effects. Click on the Effects button to bring up the plugin chain. We can also look at the mixer with Ctrl-M to see our plugin chain as a series of inserts. Currently, the entire effects chain is bypassed. We can hold Shift and click on this button to re-enable the effects chain. We can also enable and disable plugins by holding Shift and clicking on them as well. SILAS's effects chain is very simple. With all of the effects off, we can listen to Jonathan's original delivery.
User health advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute.
First in the effects chain is Little Altar Boy. This is a simple, straightforward pitch and formant shifter. Unfortunately, the school does not have licenses for this, so unless you already own this plugin, you're not going to be able to use it. As an alternative, I've dialed in some repitch settings that are close enough. I do think Little Altar Boy is the better sounding of the two. Here's what it's currently set to.
User health advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute.
A little bit lower pitched. The pitch has dropped a little bit. In comparison to Sir's voice lines, I think this helps sell the gravity of the situation a bit more. However, pitch changes can easily go too far.
User health advisory.
Dropping the pitch even a little bit more starts to sound a bit cartoonish. As a quick comparison to Little Altar Boy, here's what the repitch settings sound like.
User health advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute.
The shift is not quite as convincing, and I feel like it adds a bit of stereo distinction where the file should be mono. Finally, we have the Kilohertz Ring Mod. This is a pretty basic ring mod plugin. It's set to be mostly wet with a low-speed sine wave modulating the carrier.
User health advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute. Respiration rate of 24. Blood pressure at 136.
Now that we've covered the effects chain, let's dive into the first real step: editing and volume automation. To prepare, open the Track Automation window, which is the button labeled TR. Enable the volume track envelope. There are two main things we're doing in this step with volume automation. The first is to look for keywords in the script and emphasize them with little boosts in volume. These boosts will help keywords pop out to the player during gameplay. Let's open up the script and look for keywords for SILAS in this scene. We're looking for scene 4, Shadow. In this scene, SILAS has lines numbers 1, 3, and 4. Looking at the first line, there's nothing to emphasize. This line serves to create immersion for the player, but there's nothing important going on here. The next line, number 3, is much more important. This line establishes the monsters as an alien threat about which nothing is known, truly setting the tone for the game. Like line 1, line 4 does not have much important dialogue. However, we can emphasize 3 days ago, as that answers the question of how long the player has been out for, and indirectly answers how likely it is that the player will encounter human assistance. To mark these words as important, we can highlight them. Let's return to the Reaper project. To start, I'm going to have to make a few edits. During the recording sessions, lines 3 and 4 were recorded together. I'm going to have to separate them in order to keep the project more legible. I'll do this by moving the playhead to the point where I want to split the media item and then press S. I can also split a media item by right-clicking and selecting Split at Cursor. In order to make splits off of the grid, I can disable snapping by either pressing Alt-S or clicking on the magnet in the toolbar on the top left. Since our voice actor has very consistent delivery, I can actually identify all instances of the line Creature Unknown simply by looking at the waveform and looking for all similar shaped waveforms.
Creature unknown. Creature unknown.
My next step is to identify all of the instances of the line Creature Unknown. I want to split them into their own media clips and then mark them with markers since we have so many takes. I'm utilizing my mouse's scroll wheel to navigate through the project quickly. I can zoom in and out quickly with vertical scroll, and I can navigate side to side with horizontal scroll.
Creature unknown. Security unknown.
Here, I've identified a gaffe to be removed. I have a lot of takes of line 3, 8 to be exact. We don't need 8 variations of the same line, so let's pare it down to 3. I'm going to add a marker on each take so I can quickly audition them and decide which takes I want to keep. I'm using the hotkey Shift-M in order to add markers quickly, but you can also add markers by right-clicking the timeline and selecting Add Marker. At this point, I realize I've been using less than half of the screen, so I enlarge the track by holding Ctrl and Shift and using the vertical scroll wheel. Now that I've added markers for each take of line 3, I can listen to them one by one. I should start with the first 3, as the number of takes suggests that direction was given based on variance in the first 3.
Creature unknown. Creature unknown. Creature unknown.
We can hear that the first take is a little bit too bright and peppy.
Creature unknown.
This doesn't quite fit the tone of the game. In comparison, if we listen to take 2,
Creature unknown.
the delivery is neutral. Take 3 is even more subdued.
Creature unknown.
And a bit dark. I feel like these 2 takes convey the mood of the scene much more effectively than the first take. Now I'll listen to the other takes for deliveries that are close to the delivery in takes 2 and 3.
Creature unknown. Creature unknown.
And in fact, I can rely on my memory of the session a bit here. I recall that takes 7 and 8 conveyed the tension and severity of the situation best.
Creature unknown. Creature unknown.
I'll go ahead and decide that I'm definitely going to use takes 7 and 8. I'll move these takes to the side for now. Since I know that the first take,
Creature unknown,
is still definitely way too bright and peppy, I'm going to go ahead and delete this split. Now I'll pick my last take from the 5 remaining takes. For scripted narrative lines like this, I don't really need more than 3 takes. In fact, I could get away probably with just 1.
Creature unknown. Creature unknown.
I think that take 3 feels a bit flat now.
Creature unknown. Creature unknown. Creature unknown. Creature unknown.
You might have noticed from all these takes that Jonathan has very consistent delivery.
Creature unknown. Creature unknown.
I like the little pause between creature and unknown in this take.
Creature unknown.
So I'm going to go ahead and choose this as my 3rd take. Now I'll go ahead and remove all the extra takes of this line. I can also remove the take markers. Now I'm going to organize the project by moving the takes of line 3 in between the takes for lines 1 and 4. As with line number 3, I had many takes of line 4. I've already pared this down to 3 takes. For line number 1, I have 2 sets of 3 takes. After delivering these first 3 takes,
User health advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute. Respiration rate of 24. Blood pressure at 136.
I asked him to deliver them about 20% faster.
User health advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute. Respiration rate of 24. Blood pressure at 136.
Because I know these last 3 takes are all faster and will fit the flow of the game better, I'm going to go ahead and remove all 3 of the first takes. Before doing any volume automation, I also want to clean up any timing issues. Let's listen to this take of line number 1.
User health advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute.
Now, even though I did want a faster delivery overall, I do want more space between the words user health advisory and the rest of the line. All I need to do is add a split with S, and then move over the left clip until I get a pause that sounds right. That pause is maybe a little bit long, so I'm going to move the left clip closer to the right.
User health advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute.
And that feels pretty good. This might sound obvious, but in addition to any timing editing we want to do, we also want to clean up any mistakes that the performer may have made. For example, if we listen to this take here, Jonathan gives us the wrong respiration rate.
Respiration rate of 34.
Being a consummate professional, he immediately corrected himself.
Respiration rate of 24.
So all I have to do here is split out the error, delete it, move over the first part of the take, and fix some small timing issues. Now that I've pared each line down to 3 takes, I can start working on volume automation. The first use of volume automation I'm going to talk about is using it for emphasis. If we look back at the script at the words that I highlighted, I want to emphasize the words creature unknown and 3 days ago. Because the entirety of the third line is highlighted, I don't actually need to add any volume automation for emphasis. The only volume automation I would need to add is to fix issues with enunciation and level delivery.
Creature unknown. Creature unknown. Creature unknown.
The delivery is consistent across all 3 of these lines, the levels are good, and there are no enunciation problems. As far as emphasis, I can do that across the board for all 3 of these samples by making the line a bit louder and wise. For line number 4, I'm going to add markers for each instance of 3 days ago.
3 days ago.
Here's another instance of the line.
3 days ago in 3 days ago.
And I want to make sure that I'm putting the marker before the T in 3. I need to make sure that I'm also amplifying starting consonants to improve enunciation for keywords. Now that I've set my markers for each take, I need to listen back to see if Jonathan added any emphasis on these words himself.
Security first registered them 3 days ago in
I'm going to automate the volume envelope to amplify those words and add some emphasis. There are 2 main automation shapes I can use. The first one is a simple box. All I need to do is click and drag to highlight the region that I want to amplify. Then I hold Ctrl-Shift and click and drag on the envelope line. To start, I'm going to overdo the volume envelope by a lot. We don't need to amplify keywords quite so much. More reasonable is to scale it down to about 1.5 to 2 decibels. How much you actually need to amplify will vary based on the emphasis given during the performance.
Security first registered them 3 days ago in cargo hold B3.
Ultimately, we want the words to noticeably jump out in the DAW so that they come through loud and clear during gameplay.
Security first registered them 3 days ago in cargo hold B3.
Here I've found around 2.5 decibels is the sweet spot for this take. Next, I'm going to demonstrate the other shape, which is useful for smooth volume transitions rather than a sudden fade or jump. I hold Shift and left click on the volume envelope where I want the start and end points of my volume boost to be. After defining my bounds, I'll add a third node in the middle. Now I drag up the middle node to define how loud I want the volume boost to be. If I leave the envelope like this, it's simply going to fade up and down and feel very unnatural.
Security first registered them 3 days ago.
In order to properly shape this volume envelope, I'm going to press and hold Alt, and then left click and drag to define the contour of my volume envelope. Because this is a line with fast delivery, we want rather steep contours on each side of the envelope. If we were to max out the contour of this envelope, we would get a result that's very similar to the box technique. Sometimes we want more gradual ramping for a natural sounding emphasis. Let's listen to the line with a somewhat gentle emphasis envelope.
Security first registered them 3 days ago in cargo hold B3.
Of course, we also need to keep in mind the maximum amplification of our envelope. If I pull this envelope's level down to about the same as the previous one,
Security first registered them 3 days ago in cargo hold B3.
we'll find that while this is a good target level for the envelope to boost to, we want a harder edged envelope to match the speed of the line. The second use case for volume automation is to add a bit of performance enhancement. The main goal of this is to improve enunciation and intelligibility. Let's take a listen to this sentence.
User health advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute. Respiration rate of 24. Blood pressure at 136.
The delivery of this line is good, but we can improve its intelligibility in-game by amplifying some of these hard-ending consonants. I'm going to amplify the T in minute here. I'm also going to amplify the ending x sound in the word 6. As we can see from the amplitude of the waveform here, we don't need to amplify it as much as the previous consonant. Let's listen to see how the line sounds now.
User health advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute. Respiration rate of 24. Blood pressure at 136.
In addition to amplifying consonants to improve articulation, sometimes we need to amplify entire syllables and words. This can be due to factors like variation in performance or the spectral characteristics of a syllable. Let's listen to this sentence for an example of that. Be sure to keep your eye on the peak meter on the left.
Security first registered them 3 days ago in cargo hold B3.
Most of the words in this take are peaking at around minus 14 decibels. However, once we get to the syllable B,
B3. B3.
our peak level is much lower, even below minus 18 decibels. This has much to do with the spectral nature of the syllable B. B starts with a soft consonant, and in addition, the mouth is closed, which cuts down on a lot of the high-frequency content. We can amplify the syllable by quite a bit to compensate and get a more level delivery. Because the syllable leads into a th sound in the word 3,
3.
this is a perfect place to use a smoother envelope rather than the box approach. We'll make the 3 points here, pull the middle up quite a bit. About 3.5 decibels should do. I want to use somewhat gentle slopes for a natural transition. Let's give this a quick listen.
Security first registered them 3 days ago in cargo hold B3.
Now the delivery is more level. A quick comparison. Before,
Security first registered them 3 days ago in cargo hold B3.
there's definitely a loss of energy on the word B3. Here it is again with the amplification.
Security first registered them 3 days ago in cargo hold B3.
At this point, I've fixed all the timing errors, I've fixed all the gaffes, and I've added my volume automation. The next thing I want to do is render my edits, volume automation, and effects as new media clips. Once I've done that, I can trim the takes down into individual sound clips for export. To do this, I'll select Actions and then Show Action List. Alternatively, I can press question mark. In the action list, I'll filter for the words render and post. The action I want to select is render tracks to mono post fader stem tracks. We want to use this action rather than right-clicking on the track and selecting one of the options under Render Freeze Tracks. These options in the right-click menu will not render volume automation. I can engage the script by either pressing Run or double-clicking on the action. When the script completes, it will place the new audio file on its own track. If we zoom into the start of the rendered track, we can see the modulator waveform of the ring mod effect quickly fade out as the effect initializes. It's not very audible at the current frequency, but if we use a higher frequency, it would be more audible. This is why we're rendering effects at this step. If we instead rendered the effects on export, we would have to edit this initialization ringing out of every file we exported. Instead, we can now edit out this ringing with one move. With the unwanted modulator artifact gone, we're almost ready for export. The next step is to do a little bit of organization. I'm going to shrink down the size of the raw track. I won't need it anymore unless there are corrections in timing and volume automation I want to make. Under the stem track, I'm going to add 3 more tracks. I'll do this with the shortcut Ctrl-T. Since the project has more tracks now, I'm going to shrink their height with Ctrl scroll wheel. And the track names, I'm going to give them numbers 1, 2, and 3. These track names will be used to fill in the take number on export. Next, I'll use Shift-M to add markers for each of Silas's lines in the script. I'll give each marker a short name so I can identify the content of the line more easily. Looking at the script, I'll choose the words User Health Advisory, Creature Unknown, and 3 days ago for my markers. I'll make sure that there's plenty of space between markers for each line. Next, I'll split the render into each take. I'll move each take to the correct track and marker. I don't need to be precise with my edits at this step. I clean up the silence left on the stem render, but actually I don't need that track anymore. The next step is to clean up the audio clips. I want to trim them down to be as short as possible while losing no information.
User health advisory.
And of course, I want to make sure I've got my take soloed.
User health advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute.
Before the file is ready for export, we need to add start and end fades. We do this to make sure that we don't get any clicks or pops at the start of our audio clips in Wise. The fade can be extremely short. The important thing is to make sure that our exported file starts and ends with an amplitude of 0. Now I'll do the same on the end of the take.
6.
I want to make sure that the end of the clip is as close to the end of the sound as possible without affecting the content of the sound. Here's a little tip for trimming sound clips with grid snapping turned on. You can press and hold Shift, then click and drag the edge of the sound clip to a position that's off of the grid.
6.
Now I'll listen back to the full take.
User health advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute. Respiration rate of 24. Blood pressure at 136.
For maximum cleanliness of the final render, I'm going to do a final bit of volume automation. I'm going to automate the volume of any pauses to -infinity in order to eliminate as much noise and artifacts as possible.
Advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute. Advisory.
I double check that my automation is not cutting off any of the speech. As you may have noticed throughout this video, the waveforms on my audio clips probably look different than yours. This is because I have spectral peaks enabled. I'll show you how to enable them. I'll open the action list and filter for Show Peaks, and then select Show Peak Display Settings. Here you can see I have spectral peaks enabled. Ordinarily, this is set only to show amplitude peaks. Setting this to spectral peaks instead gives us a better idea of which parts of our waveform are noise, such as hard consonants, and tonal content, such as vowels.
Go.
With default colors, vowels in speech typically show up as green waveforms.
Days ago.
Broadband frequency content, like noise, will show up as black. Based on the length of this noise and its position in the audio clip, I would guess that this is the TH at the start of the word 3.
3.
Here I have all my audio clips trimmed down and ready for export. I've added a little bit of volume automation to completely remove any noise during silence. I've also decided to cut one of the takes for Silas's first line. I felt that the delivery of the take was a little too urgent for the tone of the scene. To prep the project for export, I'm going to look for the longest take of each of these lines. I'll hold Shift and then double-click on the longest clip. This will create a timeline selection that is the same length as the clip that I clicked on. Now, I'll create a region by right-clicking on the timeline and selecting Create Region from Selection. I don't care about the name of my project regions, but I do care about the number. I'll edit the region number by right-clicking on the region and selecting Edit Region. The region number should correspond with the line number for the scene. That means it's fine for the first region to be number 1, but with this next region, I'll have to change its number. This time, I created the region by pressing Shift-R. Since Silas's second line in this scene is the third line in the script, I'll change the ID number to 3. With my regions now set up, this project is ready for export. I'm going to select File, Render. In the render dialog, I'm going to set the source as selected tracks, stems. I can select my stems by holding Ctrl and left-clicking the tracks that I want to export. Since the tracks that I want to export are in order, I can also do this by selecting the first track, holding Shift, and then selecting the last track, or vice versa. Next, I'll select all project regions for the bounds of my render. I'll enter renders in the directory. For the file name, I'll post the template from the Discord thread. Here's a quick walkthrough of the file name template. The template starts with the prefix DIA to identify that this audio file is dialog. The project wildcard will populate this with our project's name, which should be the scene ID. This next bit in the angle brackets will convert white space from our wildcard to an underscore. The region number wildcard will be the ID number of the region being rendered. Since we made sure that our region numbers matched the line number in the script, this will be readable to us as the line number for the scene. The next component of our file name is the character, in this case, SILAS. Finally, we have the take number. The number will be automatically populated with the track name wildcard. Next, I want to make sure that the tail box is unchecked so I don't add a tail to any of my exported files. I want to make sure that my export sample rate is set to 4800 and that the channels are set to mono. Next, click on Normalize Limit Fade. Enable normalization. For dialog, we want to set this to -20 LUFS integrated. Enable brick wall limiting and set this to -1 decibels and set it to true peak limiting. We want to make sure to use true peak to avoid intersample peaks. Make sure that the primary output format is set to WAVE at 24-bit PCM. We don't need a secondary output format. Finally, check Do Not Render Files that are likely silent. Without this box checked, these settings will render 9 files. However, on line number 1, I don't have a third take. If I check this box, it will skip take 3 of line number 1, which would be nothing but silence, and instead render only 8 files. Now that my settings are dialed in, I'll click Render. With my audio rendered, I have one step to do before I commit. I need to verify that my file's rendered properly and in full, with no clipping or unwanted distortion. I'll create a new project tab by holding Ctrl, Alt, and pressing N. Then I'll import my audio into the new project by clicking and dragging them from File Explorer. You can import these as either separate tracks or onto a single track. If I clicked single track, it would import the files sequentially, rather than multiple takes of one item. For this video, I'm going to use separate tracks. Using separate tracks lets me verify the peak levels for all the files at once by playing them simultaneously. However, to listen for distortion or errors, I'll have to solo each track. I'll listen to the track for errors and keep an eye on the meters to make sure that the peak doesn't exceed -1 decibels.
User health advisory. Your heart rate is at 132 beats per minute. Respiration rate of 24. Blood pressure at 136.
I've verified that the peak does not exceed the limit that I set during render. I don't hear any unwanted distortion. The line sounds level and articulate. Therefore, I can verify this take as ready for use in Wise. All that's left to do is verify the other takes and then commit them to the repo.